He opened the surveillance app expecting to catch her breaking protocol. 11 caregivers before her had failed, some through negligence, others through malice. One had even tried to drug his sons into silence. So when Lucas saw those three wheelchairs sitting empty behind Sophia in the playroom, his heart stopped. Then he saw them. His three disabled sons, children doctors said would never stand, taking steps, real steps, walking toward her outstretched arms with joy on their faces he hadn't seen since the day they were born. Lucas's phone clattered to the marble floor. His knees buckled. And the billionaire who had buried miracles alongside his wife watched the impossible unfold on the very screen he'd installed to expose deception. 3 years ago, Lucas Hartley lost the woman who made him believe in something beyond wealth. Ava died 40 minutes after delivering their triplets. No warnings, no time for goodbye, just a sterile hospital room growing colder by the second and 3 premature babies fighting for breath. Lucas held her hand until the warmth left. Then he walked into the NICU to meet his sons. Mason, Liam, Ethan. 3 fragile lives, 3 uncertain futures hanging by machines and prayers he could no longer speak. The second devastation came within weeks. "Mr. Hartley, we need to be direct with you." The neurologist's voice was clinical, practiced. The complications during birth caused severe motor delays in all 3 boys, the kind that affects coordination, muscle development, basic movement. Based on our imaging and response tests, walking is unlikely. Standing unassisted may never happen. Lucas heard the words. But grief has a way of making you numb to new pain when you're still drowning in the old. Months crawled by. The boys didn't improve. They didn't reach the milestones other babies hit. They remained small and still in specially designed chairs, their eyes tracking movement but their bodies refusing to follow. Lucas threw money at the problem, hired renowned therapists, flew in specialists from Switzerland and Japan, purchased experimental equipment that cost more than most people's homes. Nothing changed. Mason, Liam, and Ethan didn't walk. They barely moved beyond involuntary reflexes. And Lucas, alone in his sprawling estate with only silence and memories, began accepting what the doctors declared as fact. His sons would never run through these halls, never chase each other, never stand at their mother's grave with him. He buried that hope 6 feet under, right beside Ava. Then came the parade of caregivers, 11 people in 18 months. The first lasted 9 days before quitting, said watching the boys was emotionally draining. The second spent more time filming TikToks than attending to his children. Lucas fired her without severance. The third seemed competent until he discovered she'd been selling details about his family to gossip sites for a few $1,000s. But it was the 7th caregiver who broke something fundamental inside him. He found her crushing his son's anxiety medication, mixing it into their bottles. "To keep them quiet during my shift," she'd said, as if sedating disabled toddlers was a reasonable efficiency hack. Lucas called the police, pressed charges, and made a decision. If he couldn't trust people, he would trust technology. He installed hidden cameras in every room, the playroom, bedrooms, hallways, even the kitchen. HD feeds with night vision and audio. He watched the footage each night, rewinding and zooming, searching for the next lie, the next betrayal he knew was coming. Control became his religion. Surveillance became his prayer. So when Sophia Hale walked through his door, 28 years old, soft-spoken, carrying only a worn leather bag and a gentle smile, Lucas didn't see a human being. He saw threat number 12 waiting to reveal itself. "No unsupervised activities," he told her, without making eye contact, her background check still open on his tablet. "No music therapy, no experimental methods. Follow the medical protocols exactly as written. The doctors have been clear about my son's limitations. I expect you to respect those boundaries." Sophia nodded, her dark eyes calm. "I understand, Mr. Hartley." But she didn't understand. Or perhaps she understood something Lucas had forgotten existed, because Sophia didn't follow his rules. When the mansion fell quiet and Lucas was locked in his office reviewing security footage, Sophia sang hymns over those boys like they could hear heaven through her voice. She moved their little limbs in patterns no therapist had prescribed, rhythmic and intentional. She whispered declarations over them. Strength will rise again, as if words spoken in faith could reshape reality itself. And Lucas watched it all through his cameras. At first, he watched to document her violations, to build a case for termination. Then he watched because something inexplicable was happening under his roof. Something that defied every medical file, every specialist's prognosis, every cold fact he'd been clinging to for 3 years. Mason smiled during her songs, not a reflexive twitch, but a real smile that reached his eyes. Liam's fingers moved to the rhythm of her humming, deliberate and responsive. Ethan held his head steady longer than any doctor said was possible, tracking Sophia's movements across the room. Lucas told himself it meant nothing. He told himself hope was a luxury he couldn't afford. He told himself the science was settled. But late at night, alone in his office with multiple monitors casting blue light across his face, Lucas Hartley watched a woman fight for his sons with nothing but patience, presence, and a belief that miracles weren't extinct. And somewhere deep in his chest, in a place he thought had calcified with grief, something started to crack open. He didn't trust it. He couldn't. Because hope, when you've buried it that deep beneath pain and disappointment, doesn't feel like relief. It feels like betrayal waiting to happen. But before we go further into what Lucas discovered on those cameras, the moment that shattered his understanding of possible, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments, have you ever been so hurt that you stopped believing good things could happen? Because this story is for everyone who built walls so high they forgot what they were protecting themselves from. This is about what happens when faith walks into a fortress built by fear. Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. If you've ever felt like hope was too risky, like believing again might break you, this story is for you. But to understand why this moment shattered Lucas Hartley so completely, you have to understand what 3 years of grief, failure, and fear had done to him. You have to understand the day hope died in his life, and why he'd built an entire fortress to make sure it never hurt him again. It started with the most beautiful and most terrible day of his life, the day his triplets were born, and the day his wife Ava took her last breath. April 14th. Spring morning. Ava had been laughing about baby names over breakfast when her water broke 3 weeks early. By noon, she was in surgery. By 3:47 p.m., Mason, Liam, and Ethan had entered the world. By 4:32 p.m., Ava was gone. A pulmonary embolism the doctors said was unpredictable, unstoppable, and devastatingly final. Lucas held 3 miracles in the NICU while his wife grew cold in a room 2 floors down. He never recovered from that whiplash, joy and devastation in the same breath. And when the diagnoses came for his sons, when specialist after specialist used words like severe, permanent, and unlikely, something inside Lucas simply closed. He stopped going to church, stopped praying, stopped believing in anything he couldn't control or purchase. If God existed, Lucas wanted nothing to do with a deity who would give him 3 sons and take away the only woman who could have helped him raise them. So he built walls, hired and fired, installed cameras, and slowly transformed his Connecticut estate from a home into a high-security medical facility where love was a liability and trust was a myth. That's why Sophia Hale's arrival felt like an intrusion rather than an answer. She came on a Tuesday in late February, carrying a single leather bag and wearing a cardigan that had seen better years. Her resume was impressive: pediatric rehabilitation specialist, certifications in developmental therapy, 5 years working with children with cerebral palsy and motor delays. But it was the line at the bottom that had made Lucas pause. Personal philosophy. Every child is created with purpose, regardless of diagnosis. He'd almost rejected her application based on that alone. It sounded like the kind of inspirational nonsense people said when they'd never actually lived with impossible. But he was desperate. Caregiver number 11 had quit without notice, and the agency was running out of candidates willing to work under Lucas's surveillance conditions. So Sophia walked through his door with calm eyes and a gentle smile that made Lucas immediately suspicious. "The boys are in the playroom," he told her. During her first tour, his tone clipped and professional, Medical protocols are posted on the wall. Feeding schedules, medication times, therapy exercises, everything is documented. I expect precision. Of course, Sophia replied, her voice soft but steady. And Ms. Hale? Lucas stopped at the playroom door. I don't believe in miracles. I believe in medical science and documented outcomes. Please don't fill my son's lives with false hope. Sophia met his eyes without flinching. Mr. Hartley, I don't deal in false hope. I deal in faith. There's a difference. Lucas wanted to fire her right then, but something about the way she looked at Mason, Liam, and Ethan when she entered that room, like she saw people, not patients, made him hesitate. So he watched her instead, on every camera, constantly. What Lucas witnessed in those first weeks defied everything he'd mandated. Sophia brought music into his silent mansion. She hummed while preparing bottles, sang soft hymns while changing diapers, played piano recordings during floor time. Lucas had explicitly forbidden music therapy after a previous caregiver had blasted cartoons at high volume, claiming it was stimulating. But Sophia's music was different, intentional. She'd sing directly to each boy, making eye contact, her voice wrapping around them like warmth they could almost touch. "Good morning, Mason," she'd whisper, brushing his cheek. "Strength will rise again. Do you feel it? Your body remembers how to move. We're just helping it remember." She prayed over them every morning. Not loud, religious declarations, but quiet conversations with God, as if he was standing right there in the room. Lucas watched through the cameras with clenched fists, furious at her disregard for his boundaries, yet unable to look away. Because something was happening. The atmosphere in that mansion shifted. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like the difference between a house and a home, between existing and living. The air felt lighter. The boys seemed more alert. Mason began tapping his fingers against his wheelchair tray when Sophia sang. Liam's eyes tracked her movements across the room with focus the therapists said he didn't possess. Ethan, silent, distant Ethan, laughed. Actually laughed when Sophia made funny voices during story time. Lucas told himself it was coincidence, reflexes, random neural firing that meant nothing. But late at night, watching the footage, he couldn't ignore what he was seeing. On Thursday of Sophia's third week, Lucas decided he'd had enough. He found her in the playroom during afternoon session, with Mason and Liam propped against cushions in a standing position, something expressly forbidden in his protocols. "What are you doing?" His voice cut through the room like ice. Sophia didn't startle. She simply looked up from where she knelt before the boys, her hands gently supporting their backs. "Helping them feel their legs, Mr. Hartley. Their muscles need to remember vertical." The doctor said unlikely, not impossible. Her tone was gentle but firm. "There's a difference between protecting your sons and limiting them." Lucas felt anger surge through his chest. "You work for me, Ms. Hale. You follow my rules. I work for them." Sophia gestured to the triplets. "And with respect, Mr. Hartley, fear is holding this house hostage, not disability." The words hit him like a physical blow. Lucas opened his mouth to fire her, to call security, to remove this woman who dared to suggest his grief was the problem. And then Mason reached out. His small hand, fingers that barely moved during documented therapy sessions, lifted from the cushion and grasped Sophia's sleeve. Not a reflex, a choice, an intentional movement toward the person speaking life over him. Lucas froze. Sophia smiled, her eyes glistening. "Did you see that? Mason, you're so strong." Lucas backed out of the room without another word, his heart hammering against his ribs. That night, he watched the footage again. And again. Mason reaching. Liam holding eye contact for 47 consecutive seconds. Ethan's fingers moving to the rhythm of Sophia's hymn. Small things. Medically insignificant things. But Lucas had spent 3 years in this house seeing nothing. And now he was seeing something. He told himself not to believe it. Hope was expensive. Hope was dangerous. Hope had died with Ava, and he'd made peace with that death. but watching Sophia whisper over his sons, "Your bodies are fearfully and wonderfully made. Tomorrow we will stand." Lucas felt something he thought was buried forever starting to stir. And the man who trusted only cameras and contracts had no idea what to do with it. The red recording light blinked in the darkness. Tomorrow, something would change. Tomorrow, impossible would become insufficient to describe what Lucas Hartley was about to witness. The notification came at 2:47 p.m. on a Wednesday that had started like every other Wednesday for the past 3 years. Lucas was in his office reviewing quarterly reports when his phone buzzed. Motion detected. Playroom. Standard alert. He'd gotten hundreds of them. Sophia moving between activities, adjusting the boys' positions, reaching for supplies. He almost ignored it. But something, instinct, paranoia, or perhaps something he'd never admit, made him swipe open the app. The feed loaded. Lucas's eyes tracked to the center of the frame where the triplets usually sat in their specialized wheelchairs during afternoon session. The wheelchairs were empty. All 3 of them, just sitting there in the middle of the playroom, vacant and still. Lucas's blood turned to ice. His mind immediately went to the worst places: abduction, accident. Sophia had left them unattended somewhere dangerous. His fingers fumbled across the screen, pulling up additional camera angles. Kitchen, empty. Hallway, empty. Where were his sons? He switched back to the playroom feed and expanded the view. And that's when he saw them. Mason, Liam, Ethan. Standing. Not propped against cushions. Not supported by equipment or held upright by adult hands. Standing on their own legs. Unsteady, wobbling slightly, their small bodies swaying like trees in wind, but standing. Vertical, upright. Bearing their own weight in a way that every neurologist, every specialist, every medical professional had said was beyond their capability. Lucas's hands started trembling so violently he almost dropped the phone. This wasn't possible. The imaging had been clear. The prognosis had been definitive. Severe motor delays, compromised neural pathways. These children would never, could never. And then they moved. Sophia knelt in front of them, maybe 6 feet away, her arms open wide and her face radiant with something Lucas had no name for. She wasn't touching them, wasn't supporting them. She was just there, waiting. "Come on, boys," her voice came through the audio feed, thick with emotion. "Come to me. You can do this. Show your daddy what God has been doing." Mason moved first. His right foot lifted, actually lifted, and came down 6 inches forward. Then his left. Uncoordinated, uncertain, but unmistakable. He was taking steps. Real steps. Lucas stopped breathing. Liam followed, his face scrunched in concentration, his little arms extended for balance. 1 step, 2, 3. Moving toward Sophia like she was gravity itself, like her belief was physically pulling him forward. And then Ethan, beautiful, quiet Ethan, laughed. A sound of pure joy erupted from his small body as he toddled forward, faster than his brothers, stumbling but never falling, his face lit up with discovery and delight. They were walking. His sons were walking. The phone slipped from Lucas's fingers and hit his desk with a crack that didn't register. His back hit the leather chair, then the chair hit the wall behind him. His vision blurred, his chest constricted. Air wouldn't come. The boys reached Sophia and collapsed into her arms, all 3 of them giggling and grabbing at her cardigan while she held them and wept and whispered, "Thank you, Jesus. Thank you." Lucas's mind splintered into 1,000 competing reactions. Disbelief, wonder, terror, rage. What had she done to them? What kind of experimental treatment had she been conducting without his permission? This violated every protocol, every boundary, every... He was out of his office and sprinting toward the playroom before conscious thought caught up with action. Lucas burst through the door like a man possessed. Sophia looked up from the floor where she sat surrounded by his sons. The boys were laughing, moving their legs, reaching for toys with coordination that shouldn't exist. "What did you do?" Lucas's voice came out raw, barely controlled. "What the hell did you do to them?" Sophia stood slowly. calmly, placing herself between Lucas and the boys. Her face held no fear, no guilt, only a peace that infuriated him more than any defense could have. I loved them, Mr. Hartley. I believed in them. That's not an answer. Lucas's hands clenched into fists at his sides. You've been experimenting on my children. Some kind of unlicensed therapy. You've been risking their lives. I've been praying over your sons every single day. Sophia's voice was steady, gentle, but it cut through his rage like light through darkness. I've been speaking life over them when everyone else spoke limitation. I've been moving their bodies in faith that God created them for more than wheelchairs and low expectations. Faith? Lucas spat the word like poison. You're talking about faith? Where was God when my wife died on an operating table? Where was God when these boys were born with bodies that don't work? Don't you dare stand in my house and tell me about, your sons are not broken, Mr. Hartley. The quiet certainty in her voice stopped him cold. Sophia took a step closer, her dark eyes locked on his. They only needed someone who believed God wasn't done with them. Someone who saw possibility where you saw paralysis. Someone who understood that medical science describes what is, but faith reaches for what could be. That's insane. Mason, show your father. Lucas turned. Mason was pulling himself up using the edge of his wheelchair. Standing. Then taking 2 deliberate steps toward Lucas with his arms outstretched. The world tilted sideways. No. Lucas shook his head, backing toward the door. No, there's a medical explanation. Some kind of delayed development that would have happened anyway. This isn't. I've been combining therapeutic movement with prayer and worship music for 6 weeks, Sophia said calmly. I've been anointing their legs with oil and declaring healing over their neural pathways. I've been standing them upright and whispering scripture over their bodies while you watched on cameras and called it recklessness. Lucas wanted to scream. Wanted to call her a fraud, a religious fanatic who got lucky with coincidental timing. Wanted to deny everything his eyes had just witnessed. But Mason was standing in front of him now, small hands gripping Lucas's pant leg, looking up at his father with eyes that held recognition and joy in life. You can fire me, Sophia's voice softened. You can call it medical anomaly or spontaneous development or whatever helps you sleep at night. But your sons walked today, Mr. Hartley, and I will not apologize for believing they could. Lucas stood in the playroom long after Sophia had taken the boys for their afternoon meal. He stood there trembling, his mind a war zone of competing truths. Medical impossibility versus witnessed reality. Scientific certainty versus 3 children who shouldn't be standing, but were. The God he'd buried versus the miracle he couldn't explain away. Mason's wheelchair sat empty behind him. Evidence of absence. Proof of presence. And somewhere deep in Lucas Hartley's chest, in the place where hope had died 3 years ago, something small and terrifying cracked open. He didn't want it, didn't trust it, didn't know what to do with it. But it was there, and it was growing. Lucas didn't sleep that night. He sat in his office in the dark, the glow of multiple monitors casting blue light across his face, and watched the footage. Not once. Not twice. He watched it 17 times. Each replay showed the same impossible truth. His sons walking. Mason's determined steps. Liam's focused concentration. Ethan's joyful laughter as he toddled forward into Sophia's arms. Around 3 a.m., Lucas opened the archived footage from the past 6 weeks. He watched Sophia pray over the boys that first morning. Watched her sing hymns while moving their legs in gentle patterns. Watched her whisper, "Strength will rise again," while Mason's fingers twitched in response. He saw every small miracle he'd dismissed as coincidence, every smile he'd called reflexive. Every moment of progress he'd refused to acknowledge because acknowledging it meant admitting he'd been wrong about everything. The footage from week 4 showed Liam holding eye contact with Sophia for over a minute while she sang. Week 5 showed Ethan laughing, actually laughing, at her funny voices. Week 6 showed Mason reaching for her hand with clear intention. And Lucas had seen all of it. Had watched every second through his surveillance system. Had witnessed the impossible unfolding in real time and called it recklessness instead of recognizing it as resurrection. The realization broke him. At 4:17 a.m., Lucas Hartley, billionaire, cynic, man who'd buried God alongside his wife, put his face in his hands and wept. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place 3 years sealed. He cried for Ava, for the father he'd failed to be, for the miracles he'd been too blind to see happening under his own roof. And when the tears finally slowed, when his chest felt raw and empty and somehow lighter, Lucas did something he swore he'd never do again. He prayed. "I don't know if you're listening," he whispered into the darkness, his voice broken. "I don't know if you care. But if you're there, if you did this, thank you. Thank you for my sons. Thank you for not giving up on them even when I did." The words felt foreign in his mouth. Vulnerable. Terrifying. But also true. Lucas fell asleep at his desk as dawn crept through the windows, and for the first time in 3 years, he didn't dream of loss. He woke to the sound of singing. Sophia's voice drifted down the hallway, a hymn Lucas vaguely remembered from childhood. He checked his watch. 7:43 a.m., morning session. Lucas stood, his body stiff from sleeping in a chair, and walked toward the playroom. Not to watch through cameras this time, to be present. He paused in the doorway. Sophia sat cross-legged on the floor, the triplets arranged in front of her. She was guiding Liam's hands in a clapping rhythm while Mason and Ethan watched, their bodies swaying slightly to the music. "Good morning, Mr. Hartley," Sophia said without turning around, as if she'd sensed his presence. Lucas cleared his throat. "May I join you?" Sophia looked at him then, and something shifted in her expression. Surprise giving way to warmth. "Of course." Lucas lowered himself to the floor beside his sons. Up close, without the barrier of a screen, he could see details the cameras missed. The alertness in their eyes. The way Mason leaned slightly toward the music. How Ethan's fingers were already trying to mimic the clapping pattern. "We're working on hand-eye coordination through rhythm," Sophia explained. "It engages both sides of the brain while building motor memory." "Show me," Lucas said quietly. For the next hour, Sophia guided him through her methods, the combination of therapeutic movement, musical rhythm, and spoken prayer that she'd been using for weeks. Lucas held Liam's hands and helped him clap. Sang, badly, along with the hymns. Whispered, "You're so strong, buddy," to Mason as the boy's fingers wrapped around his thumb. And something miraculous happened. The boys responded to their father's voice. Mason smiled wider. Liam's movements became more purposeful. Ethan reached for Lucas's face with wonder, as if seeing him, really seeing him, for the first time. "They can feel the difference in you," Sophia said softly. "Children know when they're being seen with love instead of clinical assessment." Lucas's throat tightened. "I haven't been much of a father to them." "You're here now, that's what matters." Later that morning, after the boys were down for their nap, Lucas found Sophia in the kitchen. "Ms. Hale." He stood awkwardly in the doorway. "Sophia, I need to say something." She set down her tea and turned to face him. "I was wrong." The words came hard but necessary. "About everything. About you. About your methods. About what my sons could become. I let fear control this house. I let grief blind me to what was possible. And I'm sorry." Sophia's eyes glistened. "Mr. Hartley. Lucas, please." He took a breath. "I want you to stay. Not just as a caregiver, as, I don't know what to call it, a partner in this. Someone who can teach me how to actually help my sons instead of just managing their limitations." "I'd be honored," Sophia said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I need you to teach me." Lucas's voice cracked. "Teach me how to pray for them, how to speak life over them, how to be the father they deserve instead of the one I've been." Sophia reached out and squeezed his hand. "That transformation has already started, Lucas. I saw it this morning. Your son saw it too." The weeks that followed felt like watching time-lapse footage of spring, arriving after endless winter. The boys improved daily. Mason began forming syllables, May and day, And so for Sophia. Liam's coordination sharpened until he could stack blocks 3 high. Ethan walked the entire length of the playroom without support, his laughter echoing through halls that had been silent for too long. Lucas was there for all of it. Morning sessions, therapy exercises, mealtimes filled with music and messy joy. He learned to pray over his sons each night, simple words asking God to strengthen their bodies and spirits. The mansion that had felt like a medical facility transformed into an actual home. But Lucas's deepest healing happened on a Saturday morning in late April. "I want to take them somewhere," he told Sophia over breakfast. "There's someone they need to meet." The cemetery was quiet, spring flowers blooming between headstones. Lucas pushed 3 adaptive strollers down the winding path, though Mason and Liam kept trying to climb out and walk instead. He stopped in front of a white marble stone, Ava Marie Hartley, beloved wife and mother, 1986 to 2022. Lucas lifted each boy out and helped them stand, supporting their backs while they gripped the edge of the stone. "Ava," his voice was soft, raw. "I want you to meet our sons. Really meet them." Mason patted the marble with both hands. Liam leaned forward, curious. Ethan made happy sounds. "They're walking, baby. They're laughing. They're becoming everything the doctor said they'd never be." Tears streamed down Lucas's face. "I'm sorry it took me so long to believe. I'm sorry I let grief make me miss so much of their lives. But I'm here now. We're here." He knelt behind the boys, wrapping his arms around them. "Thank you for giving them to me," Lucas whispered. "Thank you for the time we had. I forgive God for taking you. I forgive myself for not being enough. And I promise, I'll be the father they deserve from now on." Mason turned and hugged Lucas's neck. And in that moment, surrounded by his sons at his wife's grave, Lucas Hartley felt something he thought he'd never experience again. Peace. That evening, Lucas stood in the playroom doorway watching Sophia guide the boys through their bedtime routine. She was singing softly, and one by one, the triplets were trying to stand and walk to her for goodnight hugs. But this time, Sophia redirected them. "No, sweet boys, go to Daddy." Mason turned, saw Lucas, and his face lit up. He took 3 unsteady steps forward. Liam followed. Then Ethan, moving faster, laughing, arms outstretched. Lucas dropped to his knees and caught all 3 of them, holding them tight while they giggled and grabbed at his shirt. Over their heads, he met Sophia's eyes. She was smiling, tears on her cheeks. And Lucas realized something profound. The cameras he'd installed to expose betrayal had ended up revealing the miracle he'd been too broken to see. The surveillance meant to protect him from pain had instead captured the moment everything changed. Technology designed to maintain control had documented the work of a God he'd stopped believing in. "Thank you," he mouthed to Sophia. She nodded, understanding flowing between them without words. Outside, spring rain began to fall, gentle, renewing, washing the world clean. And inside the Connecticut mansion that had been a fortress, 3 boys who weren't supposed to walk stood in their father's arms while music played and prayers hung in the air like incense. Lucas Hartley had spent 3 years building walls. It took 1 faithful woman and 3 impossible miracles to teach him that sometimes the greatest strength is found in surrender. Sometimes healing begins the moment we stop trying to control heaven and simply trust it to move. And sometimes, just sometimes, the very things we install to protect ourselves from more pain become the instruments that reveal we were never as alone as we thought. The red recording light blinked one final time. But Lucas wasn't watching the cameras anymore. He was living the miracle instead.